Herbs have been an essential part of good cooking for centuries, and in fact many of our common herbs were brought here by the Romans, the Vikings and later the Crusaders. Certainly no professional chef worth his salt will be without herbs. Hindlesham Hall is renowned for its gourmet cooking, and here the chefs demand that their herbs should be really fresh, so they grow their own. Now, Caroline, you run courses here on growing and cooking with herbs. So what would you say are the herbs that are absolutely essential to grow?
By the back door, or a kitchen door, you want to have bay and parsley. And then with the parsley and the bay, thyme and marjoram to make a bouquet garni for your cooked dishes. For a fresh herb taste, the fine herb, which will be parsley again, chervil, chives and French tarragon.
Well, that's quite a list, and of course this is a much bigger garden than most of us could manage. So are there any, for example, that I could grow in pots?
Yes, another two of my favourites are rosemary and sage, and they, having come from mountainous districts, are very happy to be preferably in a large clay pot. The rosemary forms a nice central feature, and the sage grows in a very attractive fashion round the edge of the pot, and it forms a ruff, which looks very good.
And what about in the borders?
Well, there's lots of scope in the borders with herbs. You've got your hedging, which will give you your formality of lavenders, hyssop, cotton lavender. Then you can go for the big statement plants, the jungle herbs like angelica, lovage, or the more architectural ones, like we've got bronze fennel and green fennel here, which will be tall, as I say, statement plants.
Now, of course, we all know about mint sauce and sage and onion stuffing and that sort of thing. But what could you recommend that is really quite unusual?
Well, if you're looking for a fresh taste, then what I call the salading herbs, nasturtiums, dill, all chopped up with their different leaf shapes and colour, basil, into a salad, just tossed into the salad, a multitude of fresh flavours. Flowers, we're standing in front of the nasturtiums, they got their name from the Latin nasus tortus, meaning a convulsed nose because they're so peppery. Chive flowers with their spring onion flavour, garlic chive flowers with their garlic flavour, borage flowers, you can go on forever. From a cooking point of view, instead of rosemary with lamb, take your tender joint of lamb, sit it on lavender leaves and an unpeeled clove of garlic. Let those flavours infuse through the joint. Alternatively, if it's a bit of a tough old piece of lamb, incise it with the garlic and the lavender leaves, roast it, and you'll have the most perfect joint.
It sounds absolutely mouth-watering. Now, at the risk of sounding a bit Philistine, I have to say that the dried herbs that I buy in the supermarket do smell wonderful. So is it really better to use fresh ones?
Most definitely. Must use fresh ones. If you want that Mediterranean, lovely, fragrant flavour to come through, just add in with rosemary and sage and thyme, a little bit of hyssop and a little bit of lavender, and you'll have that magic taste.
Last summer, we invited two eminent garden designers to create for us a couple of small herb gardens that we could build here at Barnsdale. Their brief was to design a garden measuring only 3 metres by 4 that could be built as a garden within a garden. Robin Williams created a romantic garden designed for relaxation and contemplation. Well, it's a far cry from the south of France here at Barnsdale, but we are going to give this garden that hot Mediterranean look. So Robin has specified a low brick wall in these lovely warm red bricks. But do bear in mind that this is designed to be part of a larger garden, so you could possibly completely dispense with the brick wall, or perhaps replace it with something like a picket fence if you want to reduce the cost. This is also designed to be modular, so you should be able to take any part of the garden and use it elsewhere. Or perhaps just a single idea like these terracotta pipes that Robin has specified for use both as a retaining wall and as a container for herbs, particularly those of the more invasive kind like mint. These pipes are a stock item at any builder's merchants, though they are about 1 metre long, so some of the shorter ones have been cut up with a special stone saw, which you can hire at any hire shop. Now the longer ones are sunk in at least 1 foot deep, but the shorter ones don't need to be that deep. But do bear in mind, of course, that they've got a bit of soil to retain behind them, so make sure they're nice and firm. And also make sure that they're dead level, because otherwise they're going to offend the eye forever. And once you've got them right, then firm them in well with your boot. The entrance to the garden is surrounded by a low wooden fence, just really to give it that cottage garden feel. So I've made up some small wooden panels like this. Now they're not difficult to make if you're handy with a saw and a hammer, but if you're not, you could buy paling fence panels, which are really quite cheap. And they just screw in between the fencing posts, and they go in there, 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 and there. Before I start laying the paving, there's one dirty job that I want to get over and done with. Those terracotta pipes need filling up with compost. And I've made the compost with 2 parts of good garden soil, 1 part of really coarse grit, and 1 part of garden compost. Now, if you haven't got garden compost, then you can use something like fine composted bark. You can see what I mean about this being a messy job now. The next job is to dig out for the paving. I'll need 2 inches of concrete. The slabs are 2 inches thick and they're laid on 1 inch of mortar, making 5 inches overall. Then I put in pegs, the top of which come to the finished level of the paving. The concrete is put in dry, and that consists of 8 parts of ballast to 1 of cement. It's rake level and then trodden down firm. The brick edging is set on a bed of mortar made with 3 parts of builder's sand to 1 of cement, and the fillet of mortar goes round the bottom to hold them firm. I'm going to lay the pavers onto a solid bed of mortar because they're quite small and I don't want them to move about. And they're simply set on there and then levelled into the pegs with a spirit level. The pegs representing the top of the paving level. It's worth taking a lot of trouble, particularly over the first one, because of course this will set the level for all the others. Now, there is an alternative to this, and that is that you could lay the paving onto a bed of compost, the same compost that was used in the earthenware pipes. And that means that when you put the gravel over the top, you'll get plenty of plants seeding into the gravel. The only snag with that, of course, is that weeds will seed in there too, so it's a little bit of extra work, perhaps not a good idea for a busy gardener. So that's why I'm doing this one this particular way. I waited a day and a half for the mortar to go off underneath the slabs, and now that the gravel's dried out in the sunshine, it looks rather nice, I think. I managed to get hold of some gravel with different sized pebbles in it, which I think adds to it quite a lot. And so now it's really just a case of tickling up the borders a little bit, and we're ready for planting. But while your back was turned, I did put up this larch. It's really very easy, you just follow the instructions in fact. But if you wanted to reduce the price a bit, you could easily make something like this out of timber from the builder's merchant, or if you went down to the demolition yard, of course, you could do it even cheaper. But really, at the end of the day, with any garden, it's the plants that make it. So I couldn't resist putting in a couple of big ivies. This one is Heterohelix Goldheart and Heterohelix Glacier over here, which when they've grown will look terrific and make a very good base for a clematis to grow up. Now, we've built this garden up in a very short time, of course, and we've used many more plants than are really necessary. You certainly won't need this many because you'll find that herbs will go very fast indeed. And in fact, in a year or 18 months' time, you'll probably find that you're doing more clipping than anything else just to keep them in check, though the harvesting of herbs does help to do that. I think, though, that this sort of planting does give you an idea of what the garden is going to look like in probably about a year or 18 months. Now, these terracotta pipes are a very nice decorative feature, but they're also ideal for planting certain types of herbs. The really invasive ones, like the mints, of course, will go extremely well in these. And remember that there are all sorts of different mints with different colours of the foliage. And I understand that they're just as good in the kitchen as the green ones. And we can get those in there, and very shortly that is going to fall over the side of this container and look really nice. Now, the other plants that you can put in this sort of thing are those that require very well drained conditions, and the thymes are perfect for that. And again, there are all sorts of different types of thymes as well, though I believe that the best one for the kitchen is still the good old common thyme. And they'll get really baked by the sun here, and that is exactly what they want. And a plant like that, you see, will just fit in there perfectly. You know, just sitting here, now we've just finished planting, already there's a great waft of perfume coming up from these herbs, and it really is a very pleasant place to sit. And bear in mind that this area is only 9 feet by 12 feet, so most people could fit it into their garden. But if you haven't even got space for this, then do grow just a few herbs, perhaps in 2 or 3 terracotta pipes. Herb growing is something that our ancestors have been doing for generations, and we really ought to be continuing it.
I did a 4-year training at the School of Herbal Medicine, and I've been practicing as a medical herbalist for the last 15 years. We have a clinic about half a mile away up the road. I've loved herbs and been using herbs probably for about the last 25 years. I just had a vision of having herb gardens and being able to just enjoy the herbs that I love and that I use in my practice, being around me and growing them, which just gives you another dimension on herbal medicine, really. I wanted to create a series of different rooms, and each room represented a different area of one's life that you could use herbs in. This is the Chinese garden that's laid out in the shape of a yin-yang sign, which is the ancient Chinese symbol used in medicine to symbolize masculine and feminine, darkness and light. In here we've got the ginkgo tree, which is an ancient Chinese remedy which has had an enormous amount of research done on it lately. It's a wonderful herb for helping to prevent degeneration of the arteries and to aid recovery after a stroke. We've got Perilla frutescens here, which is used for nausea and vomiting, particularly in morning sickness. This is the Indian garden, laid out in quite a formal style, rather reminiscent of how the English might have laid out their gardens in India, hence the box hedging all around. And this is Ganesh, the patron of Ayurvedic medicine, which is Indian herbal medicine. He's the god of wisdom who removes all obstacles and enables the realization of all goals. Rather a wonderful ideal. All the herbs in this garden are used traditionally in Indian medicine. Here we've got coriander. The seeds are very interesting because they're the only spice in India that has a cooling effect. and they're used for pitta diseases. That means hot inflammatory problems, particularly in the bowels. The leaves, and particularly the fresh juice from the leaves, are used for allergies, for hay fever and rhinitis, and sinusitis, catarrhal conditions, coughs and colds. This is the medicinal garden here that's laid out in a spiral that represents the snake around the staff on the traditional emblem of the caduceus, which represents medicine. This pretty little plant, familiar to most of us, is a wonderful antiseptic. We may be familiar with the taste of thymol, an extract from the essential oil of thyme, in our toothpastes and antiseptic mouthwashes. Thyme has an antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal action and can be used for a whole host of infections. It has a particular affinity for the reproductive system and is used for gynecological infections, particularly for thrush. This herb next to it is lungwort, pulmonaria. Now, according to the doctrine of signatures, the ancient or the medieval herbalists said that the leaf resembled the lungs, and so they used it for the lungs. Scientific research has actually demonstrated that it does have a remedial effect in the lungs, and it's used as a very soothing remedy for harsh, irritating coughs. This is nasturtium. Both the leaves and the flowers can be used in salads. In fact, they lend a very peppery taste to the salad, and they're delicious. The peppery taste stimulates the flow of saliva in the mouth and digestive juices all the way through, ensuring good digestion, absorption, and regular bowel function. Over here, we've got milk thistle. When the flower has gone over and the seeds are there, they make a wonderful remedy for the liver. And this is a very interesting plant because modern research has come up with the fact that it is one of the best remedies for a damaged liver. It actually helps liver regeneration, and it's been used for livers damaged by alcoholic degeneration, been used for chronic cirrhosis, chronic hepatitis. This is red sage or purple sage. It smells absolutely lovely, and again, the essential oils are highly antiseptic, so it can be used for a whole variety of infections. It has an estrogenic action, so it's a particularly useful herb for menopause and particularly for night sweats. In the old days, when tuberculosis was rife, night sweats were a real problem, and sage was an excellent remedy. The medicinal benefits of the herbs that we've just seen is in part related to their biochemical constituents and how these constituents interact in the body in a physiological way. But more than this, herbs have a very therapeutic effect on lots of different levels. Just being with them, planting them, watching them grow. Sitting here in my contemplation garden, I'm surrounded by lavender. I can see how beautiful the plant is, and I can inhale the wonderful aroma of the flowers, which is very relaxing. So that being in a garden and growing herbs can be a wonderful antidote to the stress of everyday life.
One of the joys of herbs is that in a very small space you can grow a wide enough variety to give you that incomparable flavour that only freshly picked herbs can bring to your cooking. But they're not just useful, they're very attractive plants as well, with good, interesting foliage, much of it evergreen, and pretty flowers like the pale mauve pom-poms on the chives, and of course the scent. Watering your herbs on a warm summer's evening and releasing all that fragrance is so pleasurable, it's astonishing it's not illegal. Herbs do very well in containers, and for this small city patio I've chosen these cheap and cheerful baskets, stained a lovely warm rusty red with a wood preservative and given a coat of matte polyurethane just to make them really weatherproof. Now the first job is to line them. I'm just going to put a layer of this stuff in the bottom. Bet you never thought you'd find a use for this, did you? Just to keep the wet liner from sitting on the bottom of the basket and therefore helping to prevent rot. Now, you need some stout black polythene, or if you can't find any, then a couple of bin liners will do it. Trim off the excess later, and of course, cut just a few drainage slits in the bottom. And now, the compost. Ooh. I'm using a soil-based compost here, John Innes number 3 formula, because the herbs are going to be in these containers for a couple of years or more, and so they'll need the nutrients. But almost more important, this doesn't dry out as quickly as the soilless types. And that's very important for herbs like parsley, a flat leaf one, and mint, which need a moist soil and a shady spot. This is Tashkent mint. It's a newish variety on the market. And it's the most intensely aromatic. And that's obviously a very good idea when you've only got one potful to deal with because you don't need to use as much. Mint is one of the most vigorous herbs though, so do give it the biggest container you can. Mediterranean herbs like rosemary, sage and thyme like really free draining soil. So I'm going to add a little bit of grit, mix it into the compost to give them the conditions they really enjoy. Now this rosemary is called 7C. And it's perfect for a container because it's much smaller and less vigorous than the other rosemaries.
Dill's a lovely herb too, and we've got it growing here with golden marjoram. What you shouldn't do though is grow it with either coriander or fennel because they belong to the same family, so they'll cross-pollinate each other and you'll wind up with something that's neither one thing nor the other. If you don't have space for a group of containers, you could probably find room for a bowl like this, planted with an assortment of the most useful herbs. This is plastic imitation terracotta, given an easy-to-do verdigris paint finish and sealed with matte acrylic varnish to make it weatherproof. If you don't have any ground room, grow your herbs on the windowsill. You could use an ordinary plastic trough, but to transform it into something very attractive, slip over a distressed effect drawer front like this. Incidentally, fixing one screw on each corner underneath raises the frame enough to stop it sitting in a puddle every time the herbs are watered, and so makes it less likely to rot. If you haven't got even a windowsill, then hang your herbs up. Being in warm, dry air suits Mediterranean herbs, so we're growing an assortment of thymes and basil, with some chamomile growing out of the bottom of the basket to provide refreshing chamomile tea.
You should water your herbs every day, even twice a day when it's very hot. And after the first couple of months, give them a weak liquid feed every 2 weeks or so. It's very important not to let herbs like dill and parsley flower because if you do, the plants become leggy and the leaves lose their flavour. In fact, the best way to keep your herbs healthy and bushy is to go on picking them and eating them.
Simon, we've been using aromatic herbs for centuries, probably since the Romans. Why have they been so important to us?
Well, essentially, of course, in the old days there were no drains, and so there were lots of rather nasty smells. And the only way they could do something about it was to strew nice aromatic herbs on the ground. And when the people walked across them, or horses or whatever it may be, crushed the leaves, you'd get the wonderful smells coming up. And this, of course, hid the rather nasty smells underneath.
Well, we don't have the need to disguise those sort of smells in the house anymore, but they do add another dimension in the garden, don't they?
Absolutely. I think that smells are just as important, nice smells, scented smells are just as important today as they ever were. And of course there are two types of smell. There are smells that we all recognise and know that come from roses and pinks and flowering plants, honeysuckles. There are other sorts of smells which actually come from leaves, and usually these need some sort of agitation to get the scent into the air. Mediterranean herbs are great scented plants. Rosemary, one must mention, because it has that wonderful piney sort of smell to it. But then there are mints. The eau de cologne mint, I think, is excellent as well. Southernwood. There are quite a number which I think have rather interesting and nice, refreshing smells.
You've got some things here which I've never seen before, and of course that's intriguing, like your use of berberis here.
Well, it does make a rather good low hedge, doesn't it? It's really based, this whole garden is based on the idea of a knot garden, but instead of having different sorts of hedges, we've just stuck to the one basic outline hedge using this small red leaf berberis.
It's a good replacement for box. Would it be cheaper?
Well, it would certainly be cheaper in the sense that it's a plant of bigger proportions, so you would need less of them when you were laying it out originally.
And you've got planted in the middle, some thyme over there, and sansalina here, which you've let flower.
Well, the original intention was actually just to have the grey foliage. It's quite a good well-cut grey foliage, but we let them come into flower, and by mistake, I think, we were meaning to cut them. And I thought that the very pale, creamy flower gave another proportion to the garden, so we've let it go.
Well, these days we don't want to cover our fitted carpets with herbs, of course, but there must be a way of using herbs instead of those ghastly aerosol air fresheners.
Well, the easiest and most sensible way to use herbs, of course, is to use them as cut flowers and have a vase in the sitting room or wherever, where it will give off all the scents and the smells as it has done throughout history.
It's easy to forget when herbs are plentiful in summer that we don't have that many of them in winter, so it's a good idea to make provision for winter flavouring. Now, I grow all my herbs in pots. The greatest thing about that is that you can plonk them outside the back door in full sun, and when it is chucking it down, you don't have to put your wellies on to go and gather them. Mint is especially useful in pots because it stops it being so invasive. If you've ever planted mint in a garden, you'll know that it can take over a border quicker than Attila the Hun could take over a country. In a pot, it won't, and it sits there and is always readily available. It's not very good if you try and dry it for winter use, but what you can do is take the pot into a cool greenhouse or a porch, and it will keep gently producing its shoots right the way through the winter. Other herbs, though, can be cut and dried. Sage, like this variegated one called Icterina, which is every bit as flavoursome as the plain green type, marjoram, and the thymes down below, all of them dry incredibly well. And with all of them, make sure you pick them for drying early in the morning. That's when their volatile oils are still inside, haven't been released, and they have maximum flavour. Go over the plants with a sharp knife, taking off the shoot tips. They're among the most flavoursome bits. And when you've done it, what you want to do is make sure that you dry them very quickly. And putting them on an oven tray. That gives you a clue as to exactly how they're going to be dried. If you've got an Aga, you can bung them in the lower, cooler oven for half an hour. If you've got an electric fan oven, set the heat to around 100 degrees Celsius, that's gas mark 1/4, and then put them in the oven. They want to stay there at that low setting for about 20 minutes. Now, you probably noticed there was no parsley on that tray. You can dry parsley, but it tends to lose its flavour quite quickly. So the place to preserve your parsley is in the freezer. Simply put it in a plastic bag like this one, and you'll discover that when you take it out of the bag, very carefully, it's frozen to a crisp, and it crunches deliciously onto your soup or your potatoes or whatever you want. Don't need the parsley, but I do need my sage. All I have to do now is wait 20 minutes. After that amount of time, you should discover the scent is absolutely wonderful, even though it's rather warm, and they're crisp and ready to put in the containers. And you know what they say, you can't stand the heat, keep out the kitchen. There they are, as crisp as the leaves of autumn. What you want to do now is store them as quickly as possible. Strip the leaves off the stalks, because if you crush the stalks as well, they tend to stick in the back of your throat when you're eating your chicken. So whatever they are, pull the herbs off, and in a mortar and pestle, it's very easy to crush them up. Just like that. They go into tiny little pieces. And then when you've done that, all you need to do is to put them into airtight containers. Don't do them in transparent jars, because if you leave them in the light, they lose their flavour. When you fill it up, label them, seal the top up, and put it somewhere in a cupboard.